You are called Lifting Vegan Logic, and you're interested in bodybuilding, but to build muscle, you must eat at a calorie surplus. Are you not unnecessarily hurting animals by requiring a greater number of crop deaths?
So, two things. Number one, I definitely have a bias here, right? Because I bodybuild and such. With your support of the milk and egg industry, you are, at least in my view, right? Like I don't know like where you source your animal products, but I think you're going to be supporting the things we mentioned earlier, like the forcible artificial insemination, separating mothers from calves.
It seems that your position is committing you to saying murder is wrong, it's a violation of rights, but genocide is okay if a certain threshold is met. Is that fair?
Yes, because every action that we consider wrong is gonna, at least for me, will become morally permissible if a certain threshold is met. Like if
Why hello my fellow apes, welcome to the Rational Roundtable. I'm joined today by Danny Ishay, who's perhaps best known by the title of his YouTube channel, Lifting Vegan Logic. As given away by the channel name, Danny is a vegan activist and personal trainer who uses logic, reason and sarcasm to combat anti-vegan nonsense. And today we're here to discuss his book titled Debunking Every Argument Against Veganism. Danny, thank you kindly for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Yep, thank you so much for having me. I actually watch you myself, so when you reached out to me to inquire about this podcast, I was like, hell yeah, let's do it.
The love's mutual, man. I've watched your content for a really long time. I watch a lot of vegan content, although myself, I'm vegetarian. I'm interested in animal welfare, and I'm interested in the philosophy behind veganism, and so I watch basically everyone in the niche. I know the names. I get to enjoy them. Saying bad things about me, it's good fun. And I particularly like your content. I like your style, I like the way that you approach things. Your sarcasm's amazing. If it wasn't for your accent, I'd think that you're British. So this is actually a really nice thing for me. I'm really excited to be able to have this conversation with you. And yeah, I think you're one of the strongest vegan activists. So it's going to be a good conversation.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I was actually told by some British fans that my deadpan sarcastic thing is a whole thing over there where you guys live, and I was like, oh, I didn't even know that. So
yeah, it is. It definitely is. And I've had the opportunity to come to the US a couple of times and be my normal sarcastic self and defend people when I didn't mean to. So it's that there's something true to that meme. It's a bit peculiar, but I guess that's why it was invented as a meme. There's normally a little bit of truth to it. Mm-hmm. Now, I would launch this podcast by asking what inspired you to write your book, but as a vegetarian, I know why you wrote the book. It's like if I go to a party and people figure out that I'm a vegetarian, it often quickly becomes a quick round of bullshit bingo with just about every crappy argument coming out under the sun. But the animal is already dead. Eating animals is natural. Just look at your canines. We've been eating meat for millions of years. But with you being a vegan activist, I'm sure that you get this and then some. In fact, the first three arguments in your book are the three that I've just listed. So I thought it might be befitting for us to launch this conversation by getting your views on each of those arguments. So, Danny, let me give you the first one. Here you go. What do you say to anti-vegans who come up to you and they say, but the animal is already dead?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. It seems to come from a place of not understanding how supply and demand works. Of course, there's nothing bad happening to the animal that's already dead on the shelf. They're dead. They're no longer sentient and such. But it's the process by which these products come into existence that's the problem. So when you purchase these products, you're putting in demand more future products, which then require currently sentient or incomingly sentient beings to be exploited and killed for these products. So it isn't as simple as, oh, they're already dead, why should I care? If there was a business that was selling human meat and we saw like dead humans on the grocery aisle, we wouldn't be like, I guess there's no issue with supporting this because they're already dead. You would understand that for you to support this business is to put in more demand humans being killed. So that's the quick little answer to that one. Very common one.
I guess if the problem is supply and demand, what do you think to eating roadkill?
Yeah, so me personally, I don't take issue with doing such a thing. Some vegans will differ here, but they may say something like, to do this is to perpetuate the commodity or resource status of animals, which is what we're trying to eradicate. And I may ask them, like, what about in a vacuum where no one sees it? And they may change their answer. But for me personally, I don't have much of an issue with using animal products as much as I do purchasing them, because this is what has like an actual effect on sentient beings. My main thing is I'm trying to avoid generating the existence of animal rights violations and suffering to an extent, right? So
yeah, it makes sense. And for people listening, this is the first argument that Danny goes into, so you can buy the book. I'll put a link in the description and you can see what else he has to say on that. We move to the second argument, which is, what do you say to anti-vegans who say that eating meat is natural? Just look at your canines.
yeah, so it seems like you combine two of them there. Like, it's natural though, plus look at my canine. It's kind of similar, right? Yeah, so it's just a little bit of an appeal to nature fallacy to say that we should be justified in doing something simply because it's natural. There's plenty of things that are natural that aren't good, like killing, rape, viruses. So I don't know why we should be considering an action good simply because it's natural, unless we're going to be consistent and accept all things natural as good. And I don't think people are ready to accept that, so.
No, I know what you mean. It's like when you start bringing up these comparisons, I find that a lot of people get almost offended, because it's like, why have you brought up rape? Why have you brought up murder? And it's like, well, that's how philosophy works. What you're really doing is you're exercising to try and find a reductio. You're trying to test those principles to see, okay, if your principle is it's natural and that makes it okay, then what's the symmetry breaker when it comes to these other things that presumably you do not hold? And then you're able to test their views and see whether or not the principles they're espousing are actually views that they hold or ones that they think they hold, basically.
Exactly. Yep. And people will hear, like you said, like they'll hear like rape or something like that, and they'll just have this kind of emotional reaction. They won't understand why exactly I brought this up. You appeal to something being natural to justify it. So I brought up something else that's natural and asking if it's justified in virtue of it being natural. And if your answer is no, then we have a bit of a problem here, right? Some kind of inconsistency.
Yes. So for the third argument then, which is when someone comes up to you and says that we've been eating meat for millions of years, what do you make of that response?
Yeah, so similar to the appeal to nature fallacy, this is another common fallacy, goes by appeal to tradition, I believe is the name. When you consider an action justified simply because it's been happening for a long period of time, there's plenty of other things that have been happening for a long period of time. Slavery at points happened for a long period of time. Killing, rape, just like in the nature case, it's another thing that's been happening for a long time, but we don't take the amount of time that an action has been happening to justify the action in question. That'd be insane. There's so many terrible things that have been happening for a long time. I'd hope we don't look at the length of time they've been practiced to justify them.
Yeah, I see. You're really delving into the consistency of their framework rather than imposing an objective framework on them.
Correct. Yeah.
In the book, you provide, I believe it's 40 anti-vegan arguments. Is that correct? It might be a few more, might be a few less. It's around 40.
Yeah, 40 to like 43. I could have updated it a while ago. It's been a bit. Yeah.
Fair enough. So like there's a good 40 arguments there, and you place them into a 3-layer tier system, assigning each argument as either level 1, level 5, or level 10. Would you mind expanding on what criteria each argument met to justify that level?
Yes. So level 1 is just the things like we kind of just went over. The ones that are very basic usually are based in like a very specific fallacy, or if they'll say the refutation to the argument is just very straightforward and simple, and also the degree to which you hear it. So maybe you hear it all the time, but that's not necessarily true, because some of them in level 10 also are heard all the time. But mainly the difficulty, right, being so simple and easy. And then level 5 is it's going to be a middle ground between something that is incredibly easy to debunk and something that's like, okay, wait, we need to get maybe into a little bit of philosophy here, deep philosophy to uncover it and get into like very specific nuances. And then level 10 is going to be probably the types that I see a lot of vegans struggle with, or even make, in my view, not so good of points in response to. So That's kind of the basic criteria. It's a bit like Arbitrary, like I kind of just made it on the spot, but I find that having like the 3 separate sections gave a good flow to the book. Like you start, and it goes in order from like 1, 5, and 10. So you get more and more complex as you go down the book. And I think it just worked as a matter of flow.
Well, that fits how I read it. So what I was noticing is that as we got to level 10, especially level 5, that was quite a bump, but 10 particularly, what was changing is not so much, at least from what I was reading from the way that you were writing, the difficulty in refuting the position, but rather the complexity that's required to refute the position. So you need your opposition to understand a couple of key terms, or you need to flesh out a concept that people intuitively think about a lot, but don't actually, they don't sit down and really reflect on it. And because you need to do that work first, this is why some vegans struggle to be able to respond adequately to these arguments. And so they take a bit more time. And I think that reflects with how much writing you dedicate to each of these arguments. Some of them are quite simply, that's an appeal to nature fallacy, whereas others you delve into name the trait, and you have to talk about philosophy and deontology and consequentialism, should it come up, and things along those lines.
Yeah, definitely.
So you claim at the beginning of the book that you think that morality is subjective, but then you argue that we should be logically consistent. Now, one might look at this and think that you're being hypocritical here. Doesn't claiming that morality is subjective undermine your appeals to logical consistency? What do you make of that objection?
Yeah, so when I use the word should and say like, you should be logically consistent or anything like that, I'm using a normative term with respect to my own subjective morality, right? So I'm not saying like in some sort of mind independent way it's right or it's required or morally obligatory for you to be logically consistent. I'm still speaking from my own set of subjective morality. Now, when I say like, you should not go and mass murder those people, similar to that, when I say you should be logically consistent, I'm just operating from my own, like what I believe. Now, of course, someone could be, someone who doesn't care for logical consistency in their moral system, but I just don't know like how a conversation with them would go in a productive way. Because if somebody doesn't care about their morals literally being incoherent or having a sort of contradiction, I don't like anything that you catch them on in terms of inconsistency. They could be like, yeah, well, I just don't care about my morals literally making sense or being coherent. So yeah, that's kind of
is it fair to rephrase that to say that you're essentially providing an inner critique of whoever you're interacting with? So if it's similar to what we've just done with those first 3 arguments, you're going, right, here's the position that you've espoused, allow me to work with your position and show that you don't actually hold that principle, or that your principles entail something that you're uncomfortable with. So because you're working within their framework, it just does not matter about the objectivity here, because you're able to just walk in and go, listen, I don't care about objective morality. It's not important for me to be able to convince you off like a hefty proposition. I just need to show that your position entails that you should care more about animals, perhaps even be vegan.
Yeah, beautifully put. Yeah, absolutely. And there are, of course, going to be logically consistent positions that I vehemently oppose. Just because a position is going to be consistent, it's not going to mean that I'm it's all good, dude. Like, you could have a very logically consistent racist position or something where I put all the reductios to, and you're actually biting the bullet on all of them, and you're not contradicting yourself. And to that I'm like, man, you're consistent, but I also think you're a little psychopathic. So
yeah, I know what you mean. Just curious, do you actually respect more the people that bite the bullets and go, there's my consistent framework, and I don't really care if you're comfortable about it because I'm not comfortable about your framework? Or do you prefer those that you can tell that, well, essentially they're not being consistent, at least by the lights of yourself and probably myself and critique people that would critique their view, but you can see that their heart's in the right place? Like, do you have more respect for one or the other, or is it just...
It depends, man. Like, if somebody is consistent and they're being honest, then I can have a kind of respect for that. But sometimes I don't believe that they're being honest. I think if they were asked these questions that had, in a way that had nothing to do with veganism, they may answer differently.
is it like a commitment and consistency heuristic? It's basically like, I've spoken publicly on this. This is my view. I can't pull out. It's similar to what happens with religions. It's like a sunk cost fallacy. So you have to maintain positions that you just don't buy it. Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah.
Like a good example is like when I'm doing outreach or something, and we end up getting to someone saying that it's okay to kill animals for food, but not humans because humans have higher intellect. And then I bring up humans with severe cognitive impairments that show no greater degree of intelligence than, say, livestock, and say, do you think it's okay to factory farm these humans? And they say yes. Now they're being consistent, but I wish I could have gone back in time and be like, hey, can we talk about like just the prospect of factory farming mentally handicapped humans? And don't mention veganism, don't mention anything to do with defending meat eating, and see if they would be like, yeah, you know what, it's cool. So that's what I wish I can do, but unfortunately you can't go back in time and test people like that.
No, I see what you mean. When you reverse engineer it like that, you're like, would they really open with a proposition like that? And that's where your skepticism's coming from. No, that's fair enough. So the book is great, man. I really enjoyed it. I think you do a really good job of addressing lots of the arguments. And the ones that I disagree with, I think it's because I probably work with different axioms. And I think that there's conversation to be had. There's certainly learning that can be done on my behalf. And I'm really interested to delve into the more difficult topics, at least by my lights, simply because for my own benefit, I think it'll be an interesting conversation. I don't get an opportunity to speak with someone who's as invested in the vegan community as yourself and who uses logic like you do. Because a lot of activists in veganism are just, they're quite emotional, and that's just not my cup of tea. Like, fair enough, you know, everyone's got their own. But so for everyone watching, do check out the book. I highly recommend it. But I'm now going to start delving into things where I think you and I might have a slight disagreement, and hopefully you can show me the ways.
Sure, absolutely.
Is culling ever justified? Just to put a finer point on that, you know, there's lots of foxes about, and there's too many, and they've overbred, and they're starting to be a nuisance. Is it justified to go out there and shoot these things? Rats would be another example. Like, is culling ever justified?
Got you. So ever is like an interesting choice of words, because of course there's going to be some threshold where, if passed, of like level of nuisance, I may consider it justified, right? But I think generally, no. I mean, people that tend to ask this question, it's, there's a particular invasive species who is disrupting the ecosystem or harming the environment in some way, and therefore it seems justified to cull them, right? But it's odd because, at least in my view, and I'm pretty sure we can all agree on this, that human beings are the most environmentally destructive species on the planet. Not every single one, we all have different, but like, you know, like the developed country type of human, the things that we support, but we don't take this as justification to cull off humans. And so I would just ask, you know, like, why is it ethical to cull off specific animals who are harming the environment, but not ethical to cull off humans who are harming the environment, very likely to an even greater degree than these specific invasive species?
Am I understanding correct that your answer is basically no, we shouldn't cull foxes?
Yeah, but the thing is, like, when I say generally speaking, I mean, because like I said before, there's going to be some threshold. Like, if there was some species that was going around like just murdering everything in its path, like just some crazy like alien species or something like that, just a hypothetical, and couldn't be stopped, and it was like torturing its victims and this and that, then there might be a good reason to like, hey, well, we should probably kill off this species, right? But in the general case, I'm not sure. It would have to depend. It's like a very specific, like, case by case basis type of thing.
If there is a threshold, though, doesn't that like constitute a violation of rights? So if you want to say that foxes have a right to live and you really shouldn't just go in there and you shouldn't cull them, but there's a threshold, aren't you really denying that they've got rights? You're saying that at some point, at an arbitrary situation, no, their rights don't matter anymore. What do you make to that concern?
Yeah, it'll depend on like the kind of rights-based vegan you're speaking with. You might take the position that this rights violation is morally permissible, given that this specific being is violating the rights of like X amount of other animals, right? Or some vegans will word it as like the right to, they don't have the right to go ahead and do that, so we get to have the right to stop them from doing that. It's going to depend on who you're speaking with, but certainly any position where I'm like advocating for the rights for something, there's always going to be a threshold where like, yeah, that right may be violated and also be morally permissible in terms of being violated because the being itself is causing so many maybe rights violations themselves or suffering. So it's going to depend.
Yeah, I guess I could pivot the question like this. If you're not okay with culling foxes, why are you okay with culling moles for crops?
So yeah, so we can get into the crop deaths thing if you like.
I guess like I want to get more into the crop death stuff later, but here I'm trying to see what the symmetry breaker is. It's like it seems to me that when we want to expand as a civilization, which humans are doing, our populations are going up dramatically. We don't just have our crops. What we do is we say, right, we need more crops. And so what that means is that we walk into what is nature and we just go, hey, we're having this. We go in there like the Europeans did and we just put down our flag and we go, that's ours now. And then when the poor mole the next day tries to go there, we shoot it and we go, no, you violated our rights. Do you not see that as an issue? What are your thoughts on like the expansion element rather than just the preservation?
Got you. So when it comes to this topic, it's actually interesting because it is distinct from defending food supply. It's more, how do you go about actually creating the crop field? Now, at least presumably, you can't create a crop field unless you say somebody owns it, right? If I wanted to go make one, I can't just do that. Now, if someone wants to create a crop field and there's people on it or humans in your area, you have the right to almost like push them off, whether it be through, hopefully I would say do it non-violently, whatever. But if they don't end up listening, violence is considered justified, I think, in this case. So I just don't know why this same attitude shouldn't extend to animals. That's my basic view on that. Now, I definitely have a preference. I mean, I'm not sure exactly how land is expanded upon, but I would hope, right, that it's done in a non-violent way. That maybe not even is the case, but same with the human case. I'd prefer, hey, let's try to do this in a non-violent way at first. If they don't end up moving, you have no choice, right? And same with the animal case. And then when I can weigh that up against, say, what crop fields do, what they supply, and the utility gain from feeding people, I seem to think that it's okay. But now I don't think that's, sorry, go ahead.
Well, so it's like if someone was to march into your room and they took your microphone because they just planted a flag and just said, that's my property, and hey, you're actually in this room now, and then they shot you, that's not okay. Like most of us would say that's not okay. And it seems that even if the defense of property rights works for the crops that you already have, you have this issue of expanding because you're essentially just walking into someone else's house and putting down a flag. And that seems to be a very obvious violation of rights. You're destroying ecosystems for crops, for more food for yourself. It's like, we want it, it's ours. And now if you come to it, we've got a legal reason to justify harming you should you not act according to what we desire.
Yeah, I think the problem there would then be, because presumably, like I said, somebody who wants to develop this crop field already is in, like we'll say, legal possession of it. So if somebody's in your area, we have this kind of position where we get to like politely or whatever tell them to get off of the land, and if they don't, we do something about it. So if we, like, it could be a utility thing. I have to think about this. It's a good question you're asking, because if we don't end up expanding our crop production, we starve and civilization can collapse, right? And so perhaps this could be one of those scenarios where, the utility gain from just civilization or food supplying can justify it. But this is a good question, and I probably just need to think about it a little more.
Yeah, one of the hard things I found about doing a podcast is that I love conversation. I want to keep going back and forth. But what I'm going to do is jump forward to the next question. But thank you. You give me good food for thought on that concern. So one of the level 10 anti-vegan arguments you respond to in the book is the claim that vegans pay for slave labor, so they're hypocrites. For instance, they buy phones, clothes, and even vegetables, which finance awful working conditions. Can you please provide your response to this argument so that I can object to it?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, first off, this is like a bit of a tu quoque fallacy, just a sort of appeal to hypocrisy, which, anytime someone's doing an internal critique of your view, I don't really take it that you're getting any closer to justifying your position by just pointing out that the messenger may be doing something that conflicts with the values they're espousing, right? Because someone's doing an internal critique of you. So, just put simply, the tu quoque fallacy is at play there, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also the accusation of hypocrisy carries a heavier burden than people think. I mean, vegans differ very heavily on what they value. And so I think it'd be reasonable to gain a nuanced understanding of what a specific vegan thinks before making accusations of hypocrisy, especially in this case. So simply knowing someone's an ethical vegan, I don't think is enough. I think you should probably maybe gauge their view a little more. Now, like for me at least, one of the reasons I oppose the consumption of animal products is that it's supporting them or buying them, whatever, puts in demand animal rights violations. Animals are literally bred into existence for these products to exist, right? They didn't exist prior. Now, when it comes to sweatshops with deplorable conditions, like while I certainly think that these conditions should be remedied and there should be reform and things like that, it's not as clear to me that buying products from sweatshops makes the world a worse place. And I could break that down. So for one, these workers, unlike animals, they're not being bred into existence for these products to exist. They're presumably applying for these jobs because unfortunately this is the best form of work they can get. And if they were to lose the job, or like these places were boycotted, there could be a reason to believe that their life could actually end up being worse, because either they'll be without income, possibly homeless, or to seek out a worse job of similar conditions, etc. So it's just unfortunate that given the socioeconomic status of these countries, that their options are just limited. And of course, just to be clear to everyone listening, none of this is to say that sweatshops are just fine and who cares about reforming them. We definitely should, right? But the point is that a vegan supporting a sweatshop with their purchases is not necessarily like a performative contradiction with respect to their values, leading to an opposition to the purchasing of animal products. Animals aren't taken from worse conditions like the wild and then put into farms. They literally come into existence because of the demand for these products. So if the actual materials that come into existence for sweatshops to function, which are like part of the supply chain, were say like sentient beings, right? Meaning that when you purchase things from a sweatshop, you're actually generating the existence of sentient life that's like suffering and whatnot. I could see there being a reason, but in this case, it's not as clear to me. And yeah, do you follow that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's I struggle to know where to start actually, because I broadly agree. Just some questions that come to mind is you said at the beginning that the problem with eating dead animals is that you're contributing to the economy. You're incentivizing it. Are we not doing the same thing when we buy phones and stuff? Like, is that not just incentivizing a situation where it's encouraging those people who don't have good conditions? Like, shouldn't we be very, very conscious of where we get our stuff from and deliberately buy from places which do provide better services with less slave labor? And thus, really, the vegan thing is that you really should be conscious of everything you're buying, not just food, not just some products like leather, but across the board. And just to be clear to people listening, I do know that a lot of vegans go here. It's part of why I have this thought.
Yeah, so when I say incentivizing, I mean quite literally putting into demand, say, animal rights violations, or even, if you're more of a utilitarian vegan, some kind of suffering, right? So in this case, as I mentioned before, it just isn't clear to me that supporting these businesses actually, when I say makes the world a worse place, I mean makes the world the world that is worse off with you buying these products as opposed to not buying them, because these people, unfortunately and presumably, right, they're getting the best work they can get, and boycotting them could put them out of work. And that's why to me it's not as clear. Now, do I think that vegans should shop with it like in mind with the say a fair trade and things like that? Absolutely, I think so. But I'm just saying that when someone points out, oh, you were supporting sweatshops as a hypocrisy argument toward a vegan, it's not actually clear that what the vegan opposes is happening or being supported when they purchase from a sweatshop. It's just not the same thing. It would be, I think, if say let's say this is a weird, it's hypothetical, but like, let's say that these sweatshops are making sentient socks, and like when you buy these socks, these sentient socks made in sweatshops, these socks are like suffering and they're being almost bred or manufactured, right? That would, to me, would make it a bit more of a parallel and a justified accusation of hypocrisy. But yeah, this doesn't mean, I just want to be clear. I'm not saying like, therefore vegans don't worry about this whatsoever. It's more like, I'm just criticizing the specific accusation of hypocrisy.
Yes. No, I think you raise a really fair point when you say that if you're performing an inner critique on someone else and they turn around and call you a hypocrite, doing that without knowing actually what type of vegan you are, what kind of principles you have, is pretty weak. But maybe we could characterize it like this, because I'm not sure it's meant as a tu quoque fallacy, even though it might be. The point that the anti-vegan could be expressing is that reducing unnecessary harm entails that the vegan shouldn't acquire, a phone for the same reason that they shouldn't drink milk. And since the vegan doesn't live up to that consistency, like the anti-vegan can see that they've got a phone, like from Apple or whatever it might be. What they're arguing is that the position that they have is not something they're practicing, and so they have no business coming up to the anti-vegan.
You're saying it could be like that they're not trying to justify their position by pointing out you're being hypocritical, but more so like, oh, you probably shouldn't be saying this because you're not living in accordance to it. Something like that.
Yeah, it's more along the lines of someone comes up to you and they go, your position's inconsistent. Effectively, you should have something that's more similar to mine. And their response is, yours isn't consistent. You're not living consistently. And you're right, they are making assumptions based on, for example, they're making some consequentialist assumptions that some vegans hold, some vegans don't. In my experience, forgive me, but I think vegans treat consequentialism like it's a cafeteria. They use it when it's helpful, but not when it's not, which I think is something we can get to in just a while. In fact, on this note, I will move on to the next question if that's okay with you.
Yeah, totally fine.
So that was a level 10 argument, and this is also a level 10 argument, and it is the crop deaths bro situation going on. Okay, how do I put this? So you title it in the book, Vegans Cause Animals to Die Too, Crop Deaths Tho. What would you consider, first of all, why do you consider this a level 10 argument, and then how would you respond to it?
Yeah, so I probably just consider it level 10 because I see a lot of vegans struggle with it. And I think it's one of those arguments that on the surface might be like, well, what do I say here type thing. And I think also some of the responses aren't the best. But I mean, my response to it has changed a bit over time as I've thought more about it.
Sorry to interrupt, but that's really interesting. What was your answer before you get to actually, if you don't mind me interrupting you for that?
When the way I used to say, answer it before, you're saying?
Yeah.
It'd be something along the lines of what a lot of vegans, I think, say, which is that more plants are required for animal calories than, let's say, calories from plant products. And while this is true, it can, like I'll say a carnist or a meat eater, can hit you back with, let's say, a hypothetical scenario where a farm or an animal farm actually required less crops than say a plant farm or something, or crop deaths. And it kind of posits that crop deaths are even bad to begin with, which I think is something that isn't as so clear to me. So, I mean, I've told you before about how I don't think that, defending food supply to prevent starvation is a rights violation. But, and people who oppose things like, let's say you have a human rights activist, right? They are against, say, things like human murder, killing innocent people that aren't threatening you, things like that. But if you ask a human rights activist, like, is it wrong to kill in all scenarios? They're going to say, like, no, there's going to be some times where I think it's okay. And maybe defense is one of them. So it's kind of like in that regard, like how I view the whole like defense killing thing, like defending resources, preventing starvation, etc. So when someone accuses a vegan of hypocrisy, in my view at least, they're essentially taking killing in defense of our food supply to prevent starvation to be morally the same as what we're opposing, which is breeding, exploiting, and killing animals who are not a threat to us in any way for food. So I think there's like a difference in terms of what the animal's doing and how that may be justifying the or determining whether it's a rights violation or not. And not only are they not a threat to us, at least the ones that vegans object to killing, but they only exist because we brought them into existence in the first place. And I think that's something interesting to think about as well. So on the rights front, that's kind of how I respond. But if someone's more utilitarian, there are some interesting things about crop fields being compared to wild fields. Now, I'm agnostic on whether or not crop fields generate more disutility or utility when replacing the wild, because wild fields, let's be honest, like the wild, a lot of people like to romanticize nature and say like the wild is great, whatever, but it's filled with predation in the forms of animals being eaten alive, babies barely making it past their first day due to other like predation, etc. So there's even, like, this is a side note, but there's even certain vegans that say that wild animal suffering is actually like a blind spot in the vegan movement. And I would agree with that. I think a lot of vegans are a bit afraid of addressing it because it kind of, it comes with maybe the possibility that interfering with nature might be a good thing in particular scenarios. But yeah, so in short, I'm not really even convinced that crop fields increase overall death. They might, you know, but I need some sort of like comparative analysis looking at like wild fields, all the death that occurs there versus crop fields. So there's like the utilitarian take, and then there's the more rights-based take, which I think I side with more because I'm more of a rights-based vegan. But yeah, that's where I'd go with that.
That's quite an interesting. So on the consequentialist front, which, as you've made clear, it's not your favorite wheelhouse. If we could show that converting nature into crop fields actually has a net reduction on harm, would we be obligated to essentially just eradicate nature?
Yeah, so I'm actually of the view that if that was all true, and you can create a super artificial environment that actually has like a net decrease in disutility, and there's no crazy, you know, ecological imbalance that we suffer as a result of implementing this environment, I think for sure we should do it. I mean, I'll give you like an interesting idea that like, this is just purely hypothetical, and it's funny, interesting to think about, but just imagine a world where, and again, just to contextualize this, I'm not saying let's do this. There's so many things that I don't understand about what the implications of this would be, but you can just think about it in your head. So imagine we were to take like all the predators and isolate them from herbivores, and then you have lab grown meat put onto AI prey that run around, and then these predators are actually hunting down, say, non-sentient prey that have a bunch of meat on them for them to consume, and then the herbivores are isolated away, and we can maybe inject a proportion of them with like some form of birth control so they don't overpopulate, and this way no one's getting eaten alive, and there's probably going to be less overall suffering. Now, of course, like I said, there's so many externalities that I probably don't understand, but that's an example of like, say, an artificial environment maybe being preferred over a natural one. So to directly answer your question, like, yeah, if crop fields were shown to be like a net positive, I think for sure we'd want to do that, unless of course doing that would cause some crazy imbalance that would lead to more overall suffering. Yeah.
So would you sign off on that personally, or was that just you're saying a consequentialist should, or would you sign that off?
Yeah, I think I would. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what would be the problem besides it's like, oh, the world's not as natural, but like I don't really care about that.
So like on the one hand, it's we don't want to cull foxes because they have rights. But then in that scenario, based on explicitly consequentialist reasoning, you're happy to violate all of their rights and just Thanos them out of existence.
Yeah, so this is going to come to like the here, let me walk back what I said, because it always comes back to like if the particular threshold is met, right? So let's say because we don't have the utilitarian calculus for this right now, but if there was a threshold met where like, oh, eliminating nature would actually like prevent so much animal suffering, like such an insane amount of animal suffering and disease and starvation and all these things that occur in nature, then I would consider it morally permissible. Now, if it's not like anything crazy, then then no. Does that make sense? So there's always going to be like some sort of threshold. Yeah.
Do you apply that threshold to humans? So would you say that if you could show that actually if we eliminated all humans, then we should press the button and just eliminate everyone?
If the threshold is met, then I'd have to, yeah, just to be, yeah, for sure. Like if let's say that eliminating humans somehow led to like infinite well-being, just a weird hypothetical, like zero suffering and infinite well-being, just wave the philosophy wand and pretend this is a thing, for sure. Now, obviously, my threshold isn't infinite well-being. It's going to be somewhere between 0 and that. Where it is, that's hard to determine because I don't know. Are you familiar with things like I think it's called the Sorites paradox?
I don't think I am actually.
Yeah, it's like basically the concept of not knowing when a particular thing becomes, say, like another thing. Like say when does a pond become a lake?
Oh, is it like a heap of sand kind of thing?
Yeah. So
yeah, I'm aware of it. Yeah.
That's why like when people ask like, oh, so where is the threshold? I'm like, I don't know. You're just gonna need to show me 2 different things, and I'll tell you if it passed the threshold or not.
What's funny is that I think that someone could say to you, name the grain.
Yeah.
Name the grain that's going to make it so that you're like, okay, and you can't. And yet, one of the criticisms that vegans have of non-vegans is that they can't name the grain. It's like, yeah, I think that this actually does apply across the board to pretty much all of these kind of like views when we break them down. What's interesting with what you said there is that it seems that your position is committing you to saying murder is wrong, it's a violation of rights, but genocide is okay if a certain threshold is met. Is that fair?
Yes, because every action that we consider wrong is gonna, at least for me, will become morally permissible if a certain threshold is met. Like if you had to, this sounds really dark, but like if you had to torture a single person to prevent infinite people from being tortured, I think torturing that single person is morally permissible. Are you violating the rights? Like, yeah, but we could say like it's a morally permissible rights violation. Depends how you word it.
That philosophical concept's great because I think the way that it's spoken of in the literature is like there's a person that's held underneath earth or underneath a city, and he is consistently tortured forever and ever and ever, but it makes everyone who lives in the city very happy. So are you saying that you would pull straws on this one, knowing that you could be the person that's tortured forever and ever and ever?
Well, so if I was that person, it's like when you ask me what I would do and should do, I think those are 2 separate things. Like maybe I'd be compelled to not because I'm the one getting tortured, but what I think should happen is going to be the thing out of my favor that's in favor of the infinite amount of people not being tortured or something. Does that make sense?
So maybe I can phrase it this way. You don't know that you're going to be the one that's picked, but I say to you, here, Danny, here is a load of straws. We've got 1,000 straws. Everyone that signs up to this, they're going to be super happy apart from one person. They are going to have the worst existence for eternity, like the absolute worst, unbelievably bad. There's 2 questions here. 1, would you pull it for yourself? Like, would you give consent to be able to pull it and maybe be that person? And 2, would you pull it for one of your siblings or one of your family members? Like, it seems that even that option's quite different.
Yeah, I don't think I would do it for either. I think 1 in 1,000 is not like my threshold there. You know what I'm trying to say? If it was 1 in like infinity, maybe. But the thing is, I seem to have like my intuitions kind of more so go toward suffering reduction than like well-being maximization. Like I seem to have a higher value for reducing suffering than increasing well-being. So even if one person infinitely suffered, if it was like one person infinitely suffers versus 1,000 or even 1,000,000 infinitely experiencing well-being, I'm more inclined to just go with a different world where like not one person is infinitely suffering and like it's more of like an overall decent balance or well-being to suffering ratio. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's this is where that threshold deontology comes in, right? It's really quite hard, and this is the point of these philosophical considerations. They test our intuitions and they test whether or not we do hold on to certain positions. It's actually thinking about things like this that stop me from being vegan, because I don't think that there's good answers to things like this, and because I can't specify an answer. And to me, speaking just for myself, it's so obvious that I'm working from intuition and then post hoc reasoning after the fact. I'm trying to go, right, I can justify that with consequentialism. I can justify that with a rights-based. And it's just, I don't know. Just speaking for me, I just sat down one day and I was like, oh, I really wish this was true. You hear like religious people that they were religious and they go, damn, I really wish my religion was true. For me, it's like, I really wish that veganism was just the right thing.
We can get into it, like, and where I think as a vegetarian, you probably should be a vegan. I mean, it depends on your moral system, of course, but we'll get there.
It does. I do think that the following questions are going to dive us into that spot, and if it doesn't, then hey, we have another conversation to be had, because I think that would be interesting. So, when talking with non-vegans, the topic of crop deaths often comes up all the time. And the non-vegan will often criticize the vegan for killing insects, moles, mice, and destroying entire ecosystems for their crops. And thus they're accusing the vegan of being hypocritical, all ground that we've covered already, right?
Yes.
This, of course, misses the point, since veganism is about reducing as much pain as possible. At least, as you've specified, it depends on the vegan, but like that tends to be the case. And a vegan diet requires less crop deaths than an omnivore one. However, how does the vegan justify eating at a deliberate calorie surplus? You are called lifting vegan logic, and you're interested in bodybuilding, but to build muscle, you must eat at a calorie surplus. Are you not unnecessarily hurting animals by requiring a greater number of crop deaths?
So, two things. Number one, I definitely have a bias here, right? Because I bodybuild and such. Number two, it isn't true that you need to be in a calorie surplus to build muscle. Although it certainly helps.
Really? You don't at all? Or
is that, in the beginner phases?
Newbie gains.
Yeah,
newbie gains. That's true. Right. That's very true, yeah.
What do you mean? You mean like after the intermediate phase and stuff?
Yep, you've had your newbie gains and it's like, right, I've been looking up the bros now and I realised that I need probably over 100 grams of protein a day and I'm going to need to eat at a surplus, maybe 400 or 500 calories extra a day.
So, I mean, this question kind of comes back to what I said earlier about crop fields possibly being a good thing. I'm agnostic on this, of course, but it could, like, imagine what you said before when you asked me, like, oh, what if crop fields were actually good? It might even be a good thing to be in a calorie surplus, right, in this scenario. Now, because I'm agnostic on the moral status of crop fields, I'm going to be agnostic, I guess, on my answer here. But at the same time, crop deaths to me don't really seem to be rights violations.
Let me rephrase it then. So let's say that, you've got your crops. And a community has their crops and it's, say, I don't know really the space, but let's just say it's got a quantity of 10. Like, that's the space that you need for your crops. And then everyone, they watch online Arnold Schwarzenegger and they're like, wow, like, that guy has got a hell of a chest. I want that chest. He's done it completely naturally, of course. And they say to themselves, okay, so I want that. How am I going to get that? Okay, we're going to all as a community just start eating more food, because it's going to be, we get our newbie gains and then we're going to need to eat more. Well, what does that mean? It means that, we only had that unit of 10 for our crop space. We now need 13, at least. We probably need a bit more. So you have to go out there and conquer more of nature in order to have that. So is your view that that's just not a problem at all? Or is it, like, how does that feed into your view of crops?
Well, this is it's funny because this being such a smaller scale example, I would just input on the hypothetical. Let's find some area of nature where there's not that many animals. But if it's going to be like a mass thing, that's where there might be some amount of like sacrifice. But so let's assume that there's no, you kind of have to expand your farmland, and this may require I guess like pushing out animals or whatnot. In this small scenario where I think it'd be more practical to say, like, guarantee that the area of land that you what's the word use to cultivate plants is better, you probably should just do that type of thing. But it's tough, right? Because it comes back to like our concept of property and like when does this set of 10 humans do?
They have to expand.
Yeah, they have to expand, right?
And also, like, if the number's the problem, we can just increase it. We can say 1 million. There's 1 million people. We say 1 billion. It doesn't really matter. The principle, what I'm trying to test here, is that you're going into nature. You're taking stuff that wasn't yours. So what I'm doing is I'm saying that the defense of saying it's our land and you can defend your property doesn't work here. because you're having to go and you're having to take land. You're having to be doing what the Europeans did, right? Not too long ago. You have to go in places and put a flag down and go, that's ours now, and then you see a mole over there and you shoot it, essentially. That's what happens with crops. And again, for people watching, I know that that's still better than, having that land for a cow, but the principle is still that you don't need to do it, and you're doing it for entirely cosmetic reasons. This isn't needed at all. It's entirely just so that you can put on a bit of muscle.
Yeah, I guess it would just, I'd have to know maybe because when I think of like this whole expanding croplands and because you're eating more thing, what I said earlier was, I'm not sure about the difference between wildland and cropland in terms of death, right? So if I were to be arguing from a place of like trying to post, like you said, what was it, post hoc, like justified, we would just want to hope that crop fields are just better and like maybe there's some sort of utility gain as a result or something like that, right? But that's why I really want to know, what is the difference between crop and not from you, I'm saying in general, like crop fields and wild fields, like because that would be obviously the justifier. At the moment, I'm just not convinced that it'd be a problem in terms of like death on the net.
I want to approach what your agnosticism is there. So I suppose if I said to you, look, here's a gun, and you're going to shoot in that direction into a target, but the target is concealed. It's concealed by trees. And because you're agnostic, you don't know that the path is clear. You might well shoot someone. However, you don't need to shoot. Like, it's not necessary. But if you pull that trigger, and because you're agnostic, you don't know if the person's there, you've got a chance of shooting someone, I would assume that you wouldn't pull the trigger until that agnosticism was cleared. Shouldn't your agnosticism be exactly the same when applied to not knowing whether or not cultivating land for crops is going to cause more harm?
So I will say that there is some data at the very least comparing crop fields to pasture land and like levels of a trophic strata, which is like which tells you like levels of distinct levels of species, and that can translate to levels of predation. So crop fields at the very least have been shown to be better than pasture, and then the wild field scenario isn't necessarily proven, right? But I still think there's some, because of how horrific, in my opinion, nature is, I just think like when you say agnostic in this scenario, I think I don't know if there's like, we don't say there's like a spectrum to being agnostic, but like I have some reason to believe, right, that this crop field could be better than say a wild field. Does that make sense? Whereas with this situation, it's like I could just not shoot this gun, and I know for sure that shooting this gun is either going to do nothing, or hurt someone, but it's not going to like increase prevent death. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but it seems to me that I could say to you, look, shooting that gun, you don't need to do it. It's completely cosmetic. And in this sense, that's a parallel to bodybuilding. You just don't need to do it. You just want to do it. It's a recreational kind of thing. Bodybuilding, going to go shooting, they're recreational. So they've got the symmetry there. I might be wrong, but I think that basically every human, and especially someone that thinks about ethics, the level of agnosticism, if we're going to do it by a percentage, is to such a degree that I don't think that you would pull the trigger if there was even a 1% chance that you could hit a human.
I agree.
That's way too high. In fact, you would probably want... But then does that translate to your agnosticism when it comes to crops? Like, do you think that there's only a 1% chance that cultivating that wild land is going to cause equal or more harm?
I guess I can't give you an answer here. Not because I'm dodging. I literally just don't know. Like it's not like the data on wildland suffering, like while it's there, I've only looked into it a little bit. I'm not like crazy familiar with it to give you like a very precise answer, but I see where you're getting at, and it's definitely like just an interesting dilemma, Yeah,
it's something to think about. It's like, it just seems to me that it really just happens to be the case that if you're agnostic, if it would be less than 1% you would need to be able to shoot that gun, which, as you said, it would be, I don't understand really why you would operate being able to eat the surplus calories when you're not way more sure. Like, I don't know what the threshold would be for it when it comes to cultivating that land. And then there's another consideration, and that is that you would say that gorillas have rights, and you would say that mice have rights. But if you take a little bit of land away from a mice, from mice, it might just be, you might be able to show actually this doesn't devastate them. However, if you take a little bit of land away from a gorilla, it ruins them. And it's like, how do you like balance this kind of like complexity in things? And why is it that, because effectively you're treating one of them as if they've got less rights because it's a consideration that you want, and that is more land in order to produce more calories. It's it's one of those more difficult questions, at least by my lights.
Yeah, I guess it would depend on the degree to which they're affected by the land expansion. Because like if it's affecting a gorilla like insanely versus doesn't so much affect a mouse, then you would make the decision based on that. Like, oh, okay, well this mouse doesn't seem to experience much detriment based on this decision, but the gorilla does. Maybe we shouldn't, right?
Yeah.
But it's all going to come back to like doing the utilitarian calculus and trying to reason if the position, passes that threshold of utility gain. But yeah, no, I'm not sure. I mean, I'll be honest, like bodybuilding and eating in a calorie surplus surely doesn't make the universe that much better, right? It's just people getting big and staring at themselves. And sure, there's some well-being generated by that level of narcissism or whatever you want to call it. But it's not something that we need to do.
I think that there is an element of a consequentialist argument you could put in favor of bodybuilding as a vegan. One of the things that goes around in meat-eating circles a lot is that vegans are skinny and they're not very healthy. And so actually you may be able to make a utilitarian argument to say, listen, I'm going to have a higher chance of getting people to consider veganism if I put on muscle mass. And one of the reasons when I went vegetarian, I decided to hit the gym a little bit more, is because people were telling me you can't build muscle mass. And then now I've got to the point where some people are surprised when they learn I'm veggie. They're like, oh, where do you get it from? I'm like, dude, there's been a Mr. Olympia that was vegetarian. It's not a problem. But like,
so we can posit that the tribe is on social media and they're trying to promote veganism, and that's the utility is that passes the threshold for it to be just. I'm just fucking around, but yeah.
No, but you actually you could say like you could say, look, if I can show you that we're going to convince more people to join, the bros in the gym and thus not be eating 5 chicken breasts every day by eating an extra 20%, 30% calories, then under utilitarianism, that seems that you could do that. That's fair. However, here's one that I think is a little bit more harder. This question's going to get me in trouble, but are fat vegans immoral? So just as bodybuilding necessitates deliberately eating at a calorie surplus, which entails causing additional crop deaths, we can apply the same logic to fat vegans. Are fat vegans violating their own principles when eating a calorie surplus?
Yeah, so my answer, it's funny because like the little justification you gave for the bodybuilding one won't apply here, because how are you going to be promoting veganism by being out of shape or whatever?
Exactly.
So I guess the answer would still come back to what I said before about not being sure about the moral status of crop fields, because like fat vegans could actually be doing the world a service in terms of reducing animal death, but we don't know. Obviously, I'm not going to have a firm stance on that. I haven't this entire time, but without that justification to promote veganism, I mean, and you hold everything else constant, it's definitely going to be more problematic. Now, I do wonder if like certain high calorie, this is just me thinking out loud, if certain high calorie plant foods can actually have less crop deaths than because certain foods obviously are higher calorie per volume, and that might make it so that if you want to be a fat vegan, you just eat this particularly high caloric density food, and you'll actually have less crop deaths than someone eating less than you, but who's supporting these crops, which have more crop deaths, so I think that's something just funny to think about. But when we get to this territory, it seems like we're just kind of shooting this shit in terms of the philosophy,
You see, like, this is where I think that it's actually really important, because as soon as we start talking about naming traits and we start getting into philosophical considerations with a man under a city being tortured and things like that, I think we are in the realm of asking these difficult questions. And they're hard. Like, they're really hard. And as someone that my diet is like 95% vegan. I eat very little amount of eggs, very little amount of milk. I eat a lot of fake meats. I like fake meats, which probably means my footprint's a bit higher than someone that, I don't know, eats bulgur wheat for the 10th time in a day. But I always get frustrated when vegans act like their shit doesn't stink. And I'm like, it's okay. Like, it's okay if we're in a position where it's like, look, living just has these problems. And I find that these kinds of considerations humbles me as a vegetarian to realize that my position wasn't quite as I'm good, you're bad kind of thing. And I don't know if you've had that experience from studying these philosophical things yourself, but I found that it eroded my confidence in a strong way.
Yeah. The thing is, like, with veganism too, and like the whole, like, some vegans will say, oh, like, we live in a non-vegan world, so my vegan actions still entail something that I don't like. So, for example, if we had like a vegan world, chances are I think crop deaths would be like minimized in greatly, assuming again that they were actually a bad thing with respect to nature. Because if you had like a vegan world that wanted to mass prevent animal suffering, but crop yields were good, maybe we'd keep them the way they are. Who knows? But yeah, so vegans will say that, and I don't like to say, oh, like a vegan diet is cruelty free. Depends how you define cruelty, right? Because some vegans may define it as violating animal rights, and if you don't take, defending your food as a rights violation, maybe that's not so cruel after all. It's going to depend who you're speaking with, but yeah, there is like some, like, I don't think the vegan lifestyle is like necessarily perfect, right? I don't think, and acknowledging that is fine, and it can maybe help your interlocutor understand that you're just doing like something like the best you can. And veganism is a good representation of one of those things.
No, that makes sense, and it's a very respectful answer. I appreciate that. So being a vegan means that you're going to be killing countless animals just by surviving. And being a vegetarian means you're going to be killing out countless animals just by surviving. I wonder if we was to take like the utility of the deaths caused, it's like during our lifetime, how many like insects and moles and mice and other animals that have been turfed off their land, especially if we're expanding, how many animals are dying and suffering so that we can survive ourselves? And I don't know how we could possibly quantify this, but let's just say that arbitrarily, if you disagree with this number, that's fine, but you get the point. Let's just say 100,000 species, 100,000 organisms are going to die. They're going to be churned in your crops as a vegan for you to live a full, happy life. But as a vegetarian, what is the difference? Well, as the vegetarian, you're going to kill at least 3 cows. I think, and I should have looked this up beforehand, so I do apologise, I think you get about 40,000 gallons of milk out of a cow, and that approximately, if you have, I think it's about 2 pints of milk a week, that will survive you until from like birth to about 70. So you at least have 3 cows, really intelligent creatures, very sentient, like they by my light seem to show more signs of intelligence than say a mole, not by a great amount, but certainly more. And specifically the methods that are used are very harsh. And then say eggs, you're also going to kill, you want eggs. I think chickens produce, I've actually forgot how many, I don't know if you know how many eggs a chicken will produce in its life.
In its life, I'm not sure, but I know per year it's about 250 of the
so
artificial.
It's 250, and then you keep it for 2 years because they get killed way too young. So you're looking at 500 eggs. And if you calculate it all out, you might be able to go, look, the vegetarian is going to be killing less. Say the 100,000 is actually going to go down slightly because they're getting the calories from the cows and then the chickens. But they're killing the cows and the chickens.
Yeah, I would just ask,
do like an approximation.
Are you factoring into like the crops grown for these animals that are producing the?
Good. So the crops actually are way higher for the milk and the chicken. Great point. Very, very, very true. But if you like calculate this all out, suppose that it like turns out that it's 100,000 organisms are killed for the vegan and 120,000 for the vegetarian. It just seems like these are completely arbitrary positions, and it's like, just as we can justify going, I'm going to be able to consume an extra 20% calories because of bodybuilding. It doesn't seem to be any less like arbitrary, to use that word again, than the vegetarian just going, yeah, I'm going to eat an extra 20% calories because that makes me happy. Like they're both not needed. They're both cosmetic. Yeah, I'm wondering what you think to that.
Yeah, so I guess it comes back to like, if you're a utilitarian type of vegan, you're going to want to still go with the less death count. You might also want to still be vegan because you're opposed to all of the rights violations entailed by dairy and egg production. And this comes back to what I said earlier about how not all vegans solely care about harm reduction. So it might just depend on the vegan you're speaking with. But yeah, like assuming we had all the math there, and you said the vegetarian has 20,000 more deaths.
Completely arbitrary, by the way. I don't know the statistics.
Yeah, we're just
very hard things to acquire.
Yeah. Now we're just speaking philosophically. I mean, you're probably going to want to just still go for the 100,000 count death with the vegan thing. Also, I just put this out there too. So, sorry, but okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, sorry to interrupt, but it's just like you haven't drawn that line with bodybuilding. You haven't dropped the 20%, and yet you're speaking as if the vegetarian should drop the 20%.
Well, I wanted to say one more thing, and then I can address that. Well, actually, I'll say too that there's still the rights violation aspect of it too. Like if you simply just don't want to support like the dairy industry or the egg industry because of the specific actions that are put onto them. But also, when someone says, you've killed X amount of animals to be vegan, I actually don't even know if vegans cause like a net increase in overall death. They certainly cause death, but I've brought this back to like the wild field thing. So it's actually not like I'm more so concerned, I guess, with net death as opposed to like how many do you end up killing? Because what if it were the case that sure you kill X amount, but you actually had these crop fields not existed, there'd be even more death because the wild is so horrific. I don't know the answers to whether or not this, which one is more. But I just think those are all other things to think about. Because when people bring up crop fields, if you're purely utilitarian, it's actually not even clear like if vegan diets are even bad. They might as well even be good. I don't know. The wild to me is pretty terrible. Obviously it depends like what wild land you're talking about. But yeah, so
yeah, you've got me thinking of a really interesting, I hope it's an interesting question, and that is that if you take crop fields and you go, listen, this one's just going to grow bulgur wheat and that's it, whereas this one's going to grow an array of crops, but the nature of the crops requires more land. Like, wouldn't it also just follow as almost an obligation to go, look, you really should just be eating bulgur wheat and that's it, because that's the thing that's going to produce the least amount of death caused by the crop deaths, versus having a variant of fruit, especially if the fruit comes from other countries. And I know that vegans do think about this. This is why avocados are a really big problem. But like, surely, like following that to its conclusion, there should just be like a prescribed diet for the vegan per country because it's the best source with minimal.
Yeah, it would just depend, right? Because like, what if crop fields actually were a good thing in reference to like death count? You might actually want to consume the vegan diet that requires more land than the one that requires like just this crop field for wheat or whatever. So it's going to depend on the answer
but then it would it would almost become immoral to be eating bulgur wheat. It's like, bro, you could have been eating this thing that's taken up more land. Come on.
It's like, bro, get your vegan diet on my level. We're eradicating nature over here.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, and just to be clear, right? Neither of us are claiming that yes, crop fields lead to lower death count than wild fields. It could be the case, and there even is some. I can point you to it after the podcast. Some of the literature on like at least crop field predation and death.
Yeah, that sounds good.
I'll
put it in the description as well for people should they want to see it. Now we're coming towards the end, and I want to talk about something I eat a lot. Well, I eat a lot of fake meats. I love fake meats. I eat corn. I think corn's amazing. Like Southern fried bites, absolutely phenomenal. Beyond Meat moving mountain. Like in the UK, it's actually really good for veggies and vegans at the moment. There's just plenty of food that you can buy in places. However, I frequently find myself in a situation where vegans are looking down on me for encouraging what is essentially going to become lab-grown meat. And lab-grown meat comes up a lot. They say, would you eat that? And I'm like, yes, I'd eat lab-grown meat. I don't have any issue with it, basically at all. I think that it would be fine. Now, I don't actually know if I would eat all of the meats, because after being a vegetarian for 7 years and being a pescatarian for 5 years before that, there's only certain meats that I still miss. Actually, most of them I don't. But in principle, I see absolutely no problem with lab-grown meat. From watching your content, it seems that you have a view that's quite similar to mine. But what do you make of like the friction that's happening in the vegan community based on this one controversial topic?
Yeah, so I think personally, I think lab-grown meat or cultured meat is like the new name for it, because they're not really growing these things in labs anymore. I think it's a great thing, and I'm in pretty much direct support of it. Some vegans have maybe like a repulsion to meat as a whole, and they have this feeling as though cultured meat still perpetuates the idea that animals are food, and it may as well do that, but I would still rather have it exist than, say, factory farming and animal farming in general today, just because it'd be overall less death count, suffering, etc. So I'm fine with it. Now, there's also different formulations and mediums being used to grow this meat, and animal-free serums have already been developed. And there's even this company, I believe, called Mosa Meats. Could be getting that wrong, but they've developed a completely animal-free process for developing it. Now, their method hasn't been cleared by by any sort of regulatory thing yet, but I can send you the paper on that as well. You can put it in the description. And to me, it's like, that's totally great, because normally fetal bovine serum is used, which is extracted in a way that does entail some cruelty. But even still with that, the end result is going to be much better than just straight up animal farming. But yeah, I think that because of how many vegans are repulsed by meat, maybe they have like an instinctual, impulsive reaction to it. But if we are serious about eradicating animal agriculture, I really don't see why we shouldn't be on board with cultivated meat. It's a great idea, and from what I've gathered, using animal inputs isn't even efficient, and a lot of companies are looking to technologies that completely eradicate animal use in general. There's probably going to be multiple companies, some of which still use like animal cells, while others don't use any. So you'll also have your decision, I guess. Maybe there'll be like a label, like a vegan label on them. I don't know. But
are you a level 10 vegan? Then this product is not vegan.
Right, exactly. But yeah, if you're, like I said, if vegans are serious about eradicating animal ag, like, you need to be on board with this.
I wrote a dissertation at university, and it was a bit of a. Some of my lecturers thought it was weird, but one in particular loved it. And what it was is I was writing about how capitalism eradicated slavery. Now, that's quite a claim, but really what I was saying is that you had such a switch up in like the most basic elements of society that had such a moral impact that it led to the emancipation of slaves. Basically, if you pay someone to do a job that they want to do, you get greater utility out of paying someone, well, not paying someone and forcing them to do it. I think that, ironically, the development of lab-grown meat is going to be the thing that makes it so that veganism goes mainstream. I think that the second that it is viable and people can buy it, all of a sudden, most people who I do agree their positions do actually entail that they should be vegan, but they haven't considered all of the ins and outs, and this is the point of a lot of your activism, and name the trait and stuff like that. I do think that that's when the tipping point's going to occur. So I find it almost painfully ironic to watch so many vegans oppose lab-grown meat, whereas I think that no, this is actually the best thing that can happen for veganism. But it will be interesting to see what that does in the future. I don't know if you agree with that hypothesis that veganism will go to a tipping point, with that invention. But I mean, what do you think?
I think if we do get to a tipping point, it'll cultivated meat will be largely responsible for that. Yeah. If it gets affordable, it's economically viable, it's everywhere in the same way that animal products are. I mean, yeah, it'll be because at that point, it's like we have molecule for molecule, the same product for you to buy. It's, hopefully the same price, if not maybe even a little more expensive, whatever. And you can purchase that. Like why would you go with the option that supports animal like rights violations and suffering and whatnot? So,
yep. So one of the things I get as a vegetarian is, and this is from vegans, they tell me that my position is just without defense. And, there's various inner critiques that can be performed, and they need to understand what my views are in order to assess that. But as far as I'm convinced, my view is actually no more arbitrary than a vegan's. As we've covered, in order to survive as a vegan, it ensures that there's going to be countless suffering and death caused to animals. On like a very fundamental level, why is it justified to, in principle, kill animals so that we can survive? I don't understand how that's not just completely arbitrary and not justified. Can you help me understand that a bit better?
Yeah. So, I mean, when you say arbitrary, I guess I'm not, the term arbitrary is used in a lot of different ways. The way I take it is I think every moral position in the end is going to be arbitrary, right? Or even take the form of some kind of circularity. Like if you ask me why, Danny, do you think suffering is bad? At some point I'm going to be like, well, it's just bad because it's bad, or it's just my preferences. It's irreducible. And to me, that's it's arbitrary. We all have our own little thing. Now I've already covered, at least in why, in my view, crop deaths don't seem to be a moral problem, but with your support of the milk and egg industry, you are, at least in my view, right? I don't know where you source your animal products, but I think you're going to be supporting the things we mentioned earlier, the forcible artificial insemination, separating mothers from calves, murdering cows, being murdered when they're no longer producing milk at a cost-effective rate, the egg industry issues, and to me, those are rights violations. So I wouldn't say oh, you have no defense. I don't know who told you that. I mean, technically your defense is going to be whatever your defense is according to your own morals and whatnot. But just in my view, I would call those things problematic. And I think if you are opposed to those things, I wouldn't support it. I mean, also we could do the whole name the trait route and ask you would you support a human farm that was, we could say, imagine there was a human we can breed that can actually produce eggs like hens can, and they're of the same cognition as laying hens, and same thing with humans, but for milk. Would you, not would you do it, because you'd probably be grossed out by all of it, but would you consider it ethical to support that in the same way you're supporting dairy and eggs and such?
Yeah, so beginning with the defense part, you're right, I should have specified. Basically, people will say that my view is untenable or that I'm inconsistent, and I actually do think that a lot of these claims are correct. But the problem I see is that as a foundation to live, we do have our mere living, our mere just being here does ensure countless deaths. If you're a vegan, it's true. If it's a vegetarian, it's true. It's not equal. There's different amounts of deaths that are caused. If you're a fat vegan, it's different to being a thin vegan. If you're a bodybuilding vegan, it's different to being, so everyone, by living a normal life, a normal healthy life, they are going to ensure a lot of deaths caused to sentient creatures. And by my lights, I just don't understand why we can say, in principle, am allowed to live violating the rights and causing tremendous harm to creatures in order to survive. That seems to just be an axiom that's just completely unfounded. And because it's completely unfounded, and if you disagree with me, do let me know, but because it's just completely unfounded, it's very hard to argue against a position that has an equally arbitrary, unfounded proposition from where they start. And so, is it arbitrary for the vegan to just decide, yeah, I get to live, and because of this, that's going to entail a lot of harm? then we can have a conversation about minimizing harm. But in principle, I just get to live, so I'm allowed to cause this much pain.
Yeah. So again, when you say the arbitrary thing, I think like all positions are. I think what you mean is like, are they in some way denying their own principle when they say, like, yeah, I get to live, whatever, it's going to cause some death. Anyway, now let's talk about things we can do now that we've established it's fine to kill a little bit to minimize killing or something. Is that something that you mean there? Or?
Yes. So I don't know if you're aware of presuppositional apologetics.
Yes.
I'm just going to use that as a comparison. I
Sure.
don't think it's completely maps on here. But what the presuppositionalist apologist wants to do is to start with a position that everyone is not going to want them to start with, and normally they want to start with their conclusion. This isn't equivalent to the vegan, but the vegan's just going to start from the get-go saying, yeah, I get to survive. And the problem is I just don't think that's justified at all. Especially if you're going to start talking about rights and pain and suffering. Like, that is a really big premise, to just decide I get to survive, and in principle I get to survive at 1 billion trillion sentient creatures being harmed and their rights being violated. Now, I do appreciate that because of your view on crop deaths, at least for the crop fields that we already have, you could make an argument that they violated our rights by crawling into our crop fields. But even when you have the compounding issue with expanding crop fields, and then whether or not there's a reason that we don't like lock people up in prison when they're mentally ill, and it's based on the fact that they don't really understand what they've just done that's wrong. I don't think a mole understands property rights. It's not like they've read Adam Smith's The Invisible Hand or anything like that. And it just seems that this position is just not justified at all. And you're right to point out that that's true of all beliefs. I think that basically it falls into the Agrippa trilemma, where basically you're either going to get a circular situation, an infinite chain, or it's just going to ground in a brute fact. Well, this is the brute fact for vegans. It's just decided that I get to live, and is it a brute fact? I guess is what I'm asking you, or do you?
Okay. Yeah. So a couple of things. So you said like the moles don't understand morality, so to call them, to like condemn them morally is a little odd, and I agree with that. I think that you can call an action maybe that a non-moral agent does bad, but not necessarily like wrong. Does that make sense? Like, oh, like I'd rather that thing not happen, but you're not actually like condemning them. Same with like a car flipping out of control and spinning around and killing a bunch of people in a town. You wouldn't like morally condemn the car, but you'd be like, that's bad. We should probably like stop it from spinning and killing whoever. Now, the question of like, is there this brute fact that vegans operate from where they say, I get to live and that's it? I think it's interesting because certainly from a consequentialist perspective, because some people will say, well, why don't you just kill yourself type thing? Because killing or being alive necessarily requires some amount of suffering and killing. But it isn't clear to me, at least, especially with somebody like me or like an activist, but also for the average person, especially vegan, that their existence causes a net increase in suffering. So someone like Earthling Ed, right? Imagine all of the good he's probably done. Earthling Ed, right?
Yeah, I know it.
Yeah. So like think of all the suffering he's prevented by existing. Yes, I'm sure he's caused suffering just by existing, right? So there's also like that question of like, maybe you can try to justify your existence by trying to make the world a better place and like cause more, reduce more suffering than you cause. And also, there's also the factor of well-being if you care about that. At least for me, I try to say, okay, I'm going to try my best to make people vegan. I'm gonna try to make my friends feel good, people around me feel good. I know that my existence does come with some kind of death, as literally everyone's does, right? But yeah, that's kind of my view on it. That you could maybe make like a utilitarian case for living under the assumption, or like not the assumption, but like under the let's say the fact or the notion that you maybe you prevent more suffering than you cause, and also you can maybe generate an amount of well-being. But like, yeah, it is an interesting question, like just existing, like is it even ethical to begin with. I don't know. It's like my mind goes toward utilitarianism and trying to say like that on the net, at the very least, I generate some good.
Yeah. Well then, Danny, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. I meant what I said at the beginning. I love your content. I love the way that you think. I really and sincerely appreciate your sarcasm. I think your book is excellent. I want to recommend everyone watching it. Do check it out below. I hope that I haven't been too much of a meme character in my responses. I hope that you feel like this has been a productive conversation. It certainly has for me, and I'm leaving with food for thought. So just thank you so much for your time and for all of the efforts that you do. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you for having me. It was a very interesting conversation. Definitely some food for thought for me as well. And I would just hope that maybe I've left you with food for thought, but not in the form of dairy and eggs. Maybe we can get you off that. Maybe.